So what is this ISO 9004-2008 guideline on how you can further improve your QMS? I always, or I sometimes call this as, beyond QMS. So when we say beyond QMS, after you have implemented your quality management system, what now? How are you going to continuously improve this? By the way, this 9004-2018 is also applicable for your ISO 14 or your ISO 45 or your ISO 27. I've prepared, again, 5 talking points for this morning. Let me just walk you through this ISO 9001 family. There's an ISO 9001 family of standards. Maybe for most of you, you're only familiar with the ISO 9001-2015. There are also a lot of other guidelines within the ISO 9000 family that you can actually use, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. Of course, the focus of our discussion will be on ISO 9004-2018. We're going to use this framework of the ISO 9004-2018 on how do we specifically improve the process, okay? So number 3 is, we'll take a look at that framework on how do we use that framework in sustaining the success of your QMS. So for those of you who are tuning in or joining this webinar inside the room and you have yet to be certified, this is like 10 steps ahead, looking forward as to, okay, what are we going to do as soon as we get the certification, as soon as we certify our QMS. And number 4, we'll talk about process management based on the specific requirement of the ISO 9004. Again, this is not 9001, all right? ISO 9001 is the QMS. ISO 9004 is guidelines on how do you improve your QMS. So let's look at one specific clause only. That's clause 8 on process improvements, process management of the ISO 9004. And lastly, I'll give you a specific example using SIPOC analysis. SIPOC, of course, is one of the many tools we use in process improvements. You must have heard of the DMIC model of Six Sigma, the turtle diagram as a tool in improving processes, but we'll just use SIPOC for today. Now, let's take a look at this family of ISO 9000 standards. The ISO 9000 basically contains the fundamentals and vocabulary. So take note of this. Take note that the ISO 9001 is the certifiable standard. So when you implement a QMS based on ISO standard, you actually apply for ISO 9001. So the ISO 9001 contains the requirements. Well, the one you can see on your screen is ISO 9000. It's not the 9001, it's the 9000. So the 9000 contains all the terminologies, definitions of the terminologies used in the implementation of your ISO 9001. So don't be confused. Because of course you will be encountering different terminologies when you implement your QMS, like process management, terms like non-conformance, audit, top management. All of these have specific definitions as far as the standard is concerned. So take note of this. If you can get copy of the ISO 9001, that would be great, so that you can clearly define the terminologies you're using in your 9001 in your QMS. And then of course we have the 9004. So the 9004 is also used as a guideline. So the guideline for what? Guideline for process improvement, among others. Take note that the 9004 in general is used to manage, for the sustained success of an organization. So once you're certified to QMS, EMS, OSHAs, you use this 9004. So what does it do? It basically gives you a broader discussion, more detailed topic on, say, number 1, how do you conduct your risk management? How do you identify your interested parties? How do you develop your context? This I'm going to share with you. In 9001, if you notice, in 9001, the QMS, it basically talks about what are the requirements, right? Obviously, because the 9001 contains the requirements. So it will just tell you what the requirements. 9001 doesn't really tell you exactly how are you going to comply with these requirements. The how are mostly found in the ISO 9004, okay? So did you get that? So the 9004 basically explains the how part of the design, the development, the implementation of your ISO 9001. So for example, in your 9001, it tells you in 4.1, okay, organization, kindly identify your external and internal issues, but it doesn't say so how you do that. If you go to 9004, 9004 describes for you, what do we mean by external and internal issues? What are these external and internal issues? So it's a very useful guide, by the way. So this is part of the ISO 9001 family. And of course, we all know that in our implementation of your QMS, EMS, OSHAs, you cannot do away with the documentation. There will always be a documentation part. And always the question is, how do we document it? So if you go to your ISO 9001, the documentation discussion is very limited to clause 4.4.1 and clause 7.5. I hope I'm not confusing you with this terminology, with these clauses. But for your reference, in ISO 9001, there's clause 7.5 that talks about documented information. So it basically outlines what are the documents. Again, it tells you about what are the documents, what are the requirements. But as to how do you develop those documents, you can use this other guideline again called ISO Technical Report 10013. So take note of this. There is this ISO Technical Report 10013. It's actually your guideline for quality management system documentation. So maybe for most of you, you haven't heard of this. You're confused as to, okay, ano ba talaga ang mga kailangang i-document namin? Paano ba isulat yung quality manual? What's the format of the procedure? Do we really need to write a work instruction? How do we design the forms and all that? Do we need to also include appendices, blueprints, templates, and so on? So all of those are contained in your ISO Technical Report 10013. They may not be found, they are not actually found in your ISO 9001, because again, the 9001 just contains and tells you what the requirements are. So the details of this are found in your ISO Technical Report 10013. And you also have your ISO 10004. What is this? So again, this is your ISO 9000 family. When we design your QMS, we basically design your QMS to make it sure that we deliver quality value products and services to our customers, right? You can actually say that you're applying for QMS certification, or maybe you're not going for certification, you're just going to align your operation to the standard. But the reason why you're doing this is because you wanted to meet the expectation of your customers. So ISO 9001 also tells you, okay, make sure that you meet and exceed the expectation of your customers. It doesn't tell you how to do that. The how, my friends, are found in this ISO 10004. All right. So because 10004 is a guideline on customer satisfaction monitoring and measurement. So, and then of course, you also have the ISO 19011. I'm sure you're familiar with this already, especially if you're doing internal audit. So ISO 19011 is your auditing guidelines, as we already know. No? So the 19011 is our guide on how do we plan the audit program, how do we implement the audit activities, the creation of the audit plan, the coming up with the audit checklist, and so on and so forth, writing audit reports. Not only that, it also includes guidelines on how do we evaluate competence of our auditor. Now, note that there are a lot of other guidelines included in this ISO 9000 family. So please, you make use of these guidelines, because this can help you really sharpen the implementation of your QMS. It's not, I'm just showing you the 5 guidelines that we normally use in implementation of your QMS. There's also guidelines on quality trainings and how do you implement your training, guidelines on how do you reap the ROI of your QMS, guidelines on dispute resolution and so on, guidelines on creating quality plans. All of those are guidelines developed by ISO in the effective implementation of your QMS. I'm just showing you the 5 most commonly used guidelines in the design and implementation of our QMS, EMS, or OSHAs. Okay. Now today, as mentioned in the invitation, we're going to talk about specifically on ISO 9004. Right. So we'll focus our discussion on 9004. Now, what is this ISO 9004? As you have already seen, ISO 9004 is our guideline in managing for the sustained success of a certified organization. So once you're ISO certified, what's the next step? The next step here is for you, of course, to improve it. Take note that if you're going for certification, you need to maintain the certificate. You will undergo surveillance audits annually. All right. As a matter of fact, you will have to recertify every 3 years. This I'm going to share with you that for me, the maintenance is even more crucial. The sustainability part is even more crucial. It might be easy to get the certification, but sustaining it might be another story. That's why you have ISO 9004 2018. I'm going to dive deeper into 9004 as we go along. And like I said, 9004 2018 goes beyond the requirements of the 9001 2015. So it challenges you to think way beyond just the simple requirements of the 9001. Now that you're certified, what's next? And it gives you broader range of topics that can lead to improvement of the performance of your quality management system. So now let's moving on. Now, the good thing about this ISO 9004-2018 is this maturity model that it designed. I hope you can see the text at the bottom. There is this 9004-2018 maturity model. And the maturity model's foundation are these elements that you can see on your screens right now. So let me repeat that. Once you're certified to QMS, you use 9004 in sustaining your quality management system, right? And 9004 shows you a model that you can use in measuring the maturity of your system. Okay? So hindi lang pala tao ang nagmamature, di ba? Kasi yung mga tao, process owner, they manage the process, right? So as they mature, as they stay longer in the organization, they become experts in their processes, they mature. And along with the process owner's growth is also the maturity of the process itself. So wag natin kalimutan yon. We need to also manage how do we mature the processes within our QMS. So you can see here, this is the foundation of the model. No? So you're familiar with this already, understanding the needs and expectations of the interested parties, processes, monitoring yung changes ng context, the identification of areas wherein we can still further improve processes in relation to strategy and objectives. All of these are found in 9004, including procedures in relation to managing interested parties, procedures pertaining to people management, because all of these are very important components. And most importantly, on top of this is the how do we manage, of course, yung ating processes and resources. So this is the model. This is the 9004-2018 maturity model. Now, to explain this further, coming from 9004, 9004 follows this basic progression, no, of maturity of your different processes, whatever that is, whether it's purchasing, whether it's repair and maintenance, whether it's recruitment and hiring, all those procedures will mature eventually. All right. That's why when your company is certified, we call the process, you know, maybe it's an initial release or initially certified process, and this process will have no other way but to continuously improve. By the way, continuous improvement is one of the principles in QMS. So as you can see on your screens right now, there's level 1 to level 5. No, so element 1, let's say that's the element in the ISO 9004. Let's say element 1 is context of organization. Element 2 is risk management. Element 3 is, let's say, resource planning. So all of these elements are found in 9004. And so you measure the maturity, let's say, for example, of your element 1, context of the organization. You need to create a criteria there that says base level. This is the base level, up to the highest level, which is a best practice, no, to level 5. Of course, your question here is that, Jong, grabe naman, mahirap yan. Gagawa namin ng criteria bawat level, no? So for all those elements. For example, you may say element 1 is your purchasing procedure, purchasing, all right, purchasing department, procurement. So ano yung base level ng purchasing department mo ngayon? Is it a random process, or the process is actually managed via ad hoc, or the process is not even documented or clearly defined? That's level 1. And the opposite of the scale or the range is level 5, which is, of course, it's a best practice. Companies go to you to benchmark your procedure on procurement, for example, in that case. So, of course, challenge, you know, because you will have to create different criteria based on what elements are you going to use in this maturity level, no? And how do you sustain that? The good thing about this 9004, it already provided this different criteria, by the way, the different levels. So I'll show you one example here. Yeah, I know maliit, no? Maybe you can take a screenshot there, use your cell phone, take a screenshot. This is 8.1, hindi ko na rin nga makita eh. So 8.1, this is on process management. So as you can see there are 5 levels. No? So in your ISO 9004, all these different levels are clearly defined. All right, it's clearly defined. So what is level 1? So if you notice there, level 1, let's say in clause 8.1 process management, your processes are not defined. The methods are not clearly described, and it's so difficult to implement because it's not even documented. So it's not properly managed. When you go to the highest end of this range or scale, which is level 5, you can see that it is a best practice. It achieves results. All the constraints are eliminated. It is seamless. It is efficient. As a matter of fact, other organizations come to your office to benchmark your procurement process. So yun yung range niya. So the question here for you is that when you assess the maturity of your different processes. Saan siya ngayon? Level 1 ba siya o level 5? Alright? So like I said, pagka-certify sa inyo, maybe the processes that you already have implemented maybe still at level 2 or level 3. At most, maybe level 3. Maybe some would be level 4. But this would already give you an idea as to how you're going to improve your processes, whether it's whatever that is, whether it's a construction process, whether that's procurement or design, whether that's mobilization or acquisition of raw materials, maintenance of your heavy equipment, whatever process that is, whether it's sales and marketing, these processes can be measured using the scale from level 1 to level 5. Kaya makita mo how mature is your organization. If all your processes are level 1 and level 2, then there's something is wrong. Right? Something is wrong. So this is what you can do is you gather your team, okay, assess it objectively, and you have to support this with data. When you say it's level 1 or level 2, what data do you have? So if you're saying it's level 3, then that means you already have designed flow diagrams, resources are clear in terms of how do you acquire it, competence of the process owners are there, present. So that's what you mean by level 3 or level 4. If not, then maybe it's level 2 or level 1. All right. And once you have completed this, because again, the 9004 standard has its own set of clauses from clause 1 to clause 10. So let me show you the structure of 9004. So this is how the 9004 looks like. No? Again, from clause 5 to clause 10. No? So I did not already included here clause 1. I did not include clause 1 to clause 4, by the way, because they're just references and guidelines. So the requirements, the specific details are found in clause 4 to clause 10. So as you can see on the left side of the screen, that's still where we identify who are your customers, what are the requirements, who is your market, whether your clients are coming from the government or your clients are private entities. You still have to identify what their needs, expectations, or requirements are. And clause 5 is context of the organization. It's a very detailed discussion on how do you do that compared to the 9001, which just basically outlines and enumerates the requirements. So in 9004, it gives you a specific instruction on how to do the context of the organization, followed by clause 6, which is the identity of the organization, which talks about what's your vision, mission, values, culture. That you cannot find in details in your 9001. And followed by your clause 7, which is leadership, which requires you to define, develop, deploy your strategy, what are objectives, how do you create policies. And you can see there clause 8 down the line, which is process management. All right. So that's why in process management, I'm going to give you an example in SIPOC analysis later on, just to give you a glimpse on what process management is all about as far as 9004 is concerned. And then once you have defined 9004, you also look at resource management. What resources do you need? Because of course the processes will not, run by itself. They have to be supported by different resources needed. And then clause 10 would be your performance analysis and evaluation, guidance and audit, and finally clause 11 would be your improvement, learning, and innovation. So it looks in a nutshell entirely different in terms of structure with that of your ISO 9001. So in that maturity level range that I've showed you earlier, this one, this basically is applied to all of this structure here from clause 4 to clause 5 to clause 11. So when you do the assessment there from level 1 to level 5, you would know right away whether your organization is mature in terms of, let's say, context, mature in terms of identity, mature in terms of strategy and leadership, mature in terms of process improvements, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, I hope you're learning here. And let me dive deeper into one of the clauses, which is of course clause 8. As you can see there, clause 8, process management. Okay, so let me show you clause 8 here. This is clause 8.2.2 to be exact. Right, so this is clause 8.2.2, managing process improvements, coming from that structure of 9004. So in clause 8.2.2, so this is specific to how do we determine the processes, how do we assess the process, how do we implement and make sure that they are reliable. All right. Of course, we all want reliable results, whether you're the business owner, whether you're just the manager of the process, or you are the process owner, you want reliable results. And in a nutshell, this 8.2.2 talks about a reliable result can be achieved via a reliable process. Let me repeat that. Reliable results or reliable process equals reliable results. Reliable process equals reliable results. If your process is disorganized, if you don't even know what the process is, or maybe you know the process, but the others in your organization don't know what is the process, you cannot expect reliable results. All right. So reliable process equals reliable results. So now, how do you make your processes reliable? So make sure that number one, as you can see on your screen, there are 10 elements there. All right. So take note of these 10 different elements of your processes. Number one is you need to clearly define what's the purpose of the process. So the purpose of the process must always be about delivering value or quality to your customers. Okay. So if the process is not clear as to who is the customer or who will benefit from this process, maybe eliminate that process. Is that clear? So for example, your process is repairs and maintenance. So the customer of this repair and maintenance process is internal, the employees of the company itself. And this process has to be efficient so that there will be no breakdown in the equipment, for example, or the tools are available if this procedure is clear in terms of what is the purpose. And so speaking of purpose and objectives, that's the next element there. You can see objectives and KPIs. A reliable process has very clear objectives and KPIs. This is most commonly overlooked by ISO practitioners or implementers or process owners. When you ask them, okay, wow, so now the process has very clear objective. The objective of the process is to satisfy the end user, the customer, or to procure materials within 24 days to ensure that there's no delay in the production. Okay, very clear purpose. But when you ask them, how do you measure this, or what's the goal of the process, the KPIs are not there. Or maybe the objectives are clear, but they don't know how to measure it because there's no KPI. So as you know, KPIs can be qualitative or quantitative. I would go for quantitative KPIs. It's easy to measure. If you're coming from a government agency, you must have this in your citizens charter. Say the processing time, the set of requirements, all of those are KPIs, a checklist of documents that they need to attach when they're, say, applying for a business permit, if you're a local government unit. So all of these are KPIs that you need to embed, and this has to be organic within the process itself. All right, is that clear? If you don't have a KPI, you'll never know how you're going to find out if the process is reliable. Third is the outputs to be provided. What is the end result? So you have to be very clear with the end result. Begin with the end in mind, like Stephen Covey said. What is the end result? What are we looking at here? Is it going to be a product, a finished service? What does it look like? How would we know if it's completed? If you're into construction, is it a 10-story building? Is it a 10-kilometer road? Or if you are into retail, what does it look like? Or if you're into production, the texture, the size, the color, you have the sample of the, make sure that that's very clear in the procedure itself. Next is your VOC. What's the VOC? VOC is the voice of the customer. In other words, this is your interested parties. Your customers now is not limited only to the users or the end users or the consumers. In the new standard, your VOC is expanded, as we all know. They can be suppliers, they can be regulatory agencies, they can be your employees even. And of course, the process owners, top management, stakeholders, board of directors, those are your customers. So identify what their needs and expectations are. This should be also clearly defined in the process. Then you also have the impacts of the processes. What do we mean impact? When you develop this process, how does it affect work? Will it make work better or will it make work more difficult? What's the impact of this process to the customer? What's the impact of this process to quality? All right. Then changes in operations and market and technologies, and so on and so forth. Inputs, availability of resources. Do not forget this. Activities that need to be implemented. So make sure that it's also clearly defined in your process. Let me emphasize that number 9 there, constraints. There's no number, but just look at it. Constraints. All right. When you say constraints, do not leave this out. So when you, again, reliable results come from reliable processes. And processes are only as reliable as to how successful you are in identifying the constraints and eliminating these constraints. So I have yet to meet a process owner or a client or a partner in ISO who will tell me that, Jong, yung process namin talagang perfect. Walang ka-constraints. There will always be constraints, all right? And so you have to identify that and address it. And lastly, risk and opportunities. Okay, so this clause 8.2.2, what you can do here is that identify one process, all right? Whatever that is, whether it's repairs and maintenance, whether it's procurement, whether it's training, whether it's sales and marketing, whether it's planning for your curriculum next year if if you're a state university, whatever that is, identify that process, get that process, and then look at these 10 elements as provided for by ISO 9004. So this is your basic criteria in mapping out the required elements of a successful, reliable process. Okay. Now, moving on. Let's apply these 10 elements in a SIPOC diagram. Okay. So maybe some of you, well, some of you may be familiar with SIPOC already, all right? Maybe for others, it's your first time to hear what SIPOC is. SIPOC stands for supplier, inputs, process, outputs, customer. Okay, so you can see there. So if you're going to apply those 10 different elements of 8.2.2 in your ISO 9004. So let's say you'll start with, what's the first thing? You'll start with the purpose. What's the purpose? What's the goal? What's the objective? Where are the constraints? So this is where you're going to put all those details. No mapping from supplier to customer. So as you can see, this is end-to-end. SIPOC is end-to-end, starting from supplier to customer. Supplier meaning who supplies the raw materials, or who supplies the information, or where do we get these inputs? Suppliers are the sources of your inputs. For example, if my process here is repairs and maintenance again, my supplier will be, of course, supplier maybe of raw materials, all right? Or supplier of spare parts that I'm going to use. Or maybe a supplier also is the person requesting for repairs and maintenance, because they'll be the ones to write the job order. They are suppliers. Okay, so they trigger the process. So they're sources of the inputs. Of course, so after inputs you have, so that's your supplier, right? So take note, suppliers. So you have to identify this. Who are your suppliers? Suppliers either of information, raw material, or anything that you use as inputs for your process. So speaking of inputs, of course, that's the next element in this SIPOC. Now, so inputs is, of course, now what you use to start the process. So like I said, if this is repairs and maintenance, your input here would be the job order. Maybe another input here will be your preventive maintenance plan, because you look at or scheduled maintenance, because all of these are necessary information, inputs for you to start the process. And where did you get the input? The source of the input would be your supplier, okay? Now, and then next, of course, would be your process now. So your process. So this is now where you're going to apply those 10 elements of 8.2.2 of 9004, from goals to constraints to risk and opportunities, methods. Make sure that you identify this in the process from step 1 up to the last step, depending on how long or how short the process is. So make sure you define the details there. And so just to cut it short, your process, as soon as you have implemented all the activities, will create for you outputs. What's the finished product? How does it look like? You can maybe include there the criteria, acceptance criteria. Maybe you can have a punch list there if you're into construction, to make sure that before you turn it over, it basically met the specific criteria coming from your suppliers. All right. And finally, of course, the customers or the end users. So who will use it, and are they going to accept it? And if they have feedback or complaints, then how are you going to handle it? So this SIPOC is actually just, the SIPOC analysis is just one of the many tools. Like I said, there's turtle diagram, there's the DMAIC, the DMAIC of Six Sigma. So this is one of the simplest, all right? The basic, most fundamental, easy to use tool in analyzing your process. So when you say analyze your process, take a look at the entirety of your SIPOC, right? Take a look at the entirety of your SIPOC. And considering the 10 elements of the 9004, and I'd like you to focus on this process handicap. So Ferrotech is one very good example. You should ask them on how they do it. They're really excellent in identifying this.